H&M is the official partner of the Fashion and Color podcast, partnering with Harlem's Fashion Row for 2 years in a row for our Sustainability Summit. H&M is revolutionizing fashion by turning recycled materials into breathtaking eco-conscious collections, such as Heron Preston, to reshape the fashion landscape through collaborative efforts like the H2 collection. They are not just crafting clothes, they are crafting the future of fashion.
So today's guest, and this week's guest, is someone who I have admired for so long, and I'm going to give him a proper introduction. So he is a veteran in fashion and the creative force behind some of the biggest names in the industry. He has styled Beyoncé, Thee Stallion, and even former President Barack Obama. But his career spans over 2 decades, always working to bridge gaps and elevate creatives of color. He's someone who marches to his own beat and does not, trust me, does not let the industry define him. Please welcome the legendary Memsor Kamarake.
Hello, my love.
Thank you. So, I got this rare pleasure of having Memsor in the hot seat.
I don't do these often. I'm trying to do more. So, yeah, you're breaking the shell.
So, first of all, Memsor, I don't even know when we first met. I feel like it must have been like 2010, 11, somewhere around there.
Yeah.
Somewhere around there.
I know that's putting years on us. But
years on us. But you were always a name that was always spoken so highly of in the industry. Anytime anyone talks about you or your name, there's always something good attached to it.
Thank you. That's lovely to hear.
Always. So why don't we start with how you're feeling now?
I'm feeling fantastic. Thank you for having me, first of all. As I mentioned earlier, it's rare for me to do these things because I think it's been one of those things where I've just seen a change in the industry, and for once I just wanted to kind of sit by the sidelines. I've been in it for so long, and I've been such a big part of it, and heavy lifting and moving and shaking, and I then just decided for a minute to kind of just step back and observe for a bit. So I've done what I needed to do, and now you graciously invited me. We had breakfast last week, and we started talking. She was asking all these questions, and then it was like, "Oh, just stop. Will you do my podcast?" And I was like, "Okay, here we are." So
right. We'll save all of this.
We haven't finished business yet.
We'll save all of this. So first, I'm going to start with, to me, one of the most epic moments is your moment at Vibe magazine. I mean, you've had lots and lots of them, and we're going to get into those.
Yes.
No, matter of fact, why don't we start with Law was on the podcast.
We're starting with Law?
Oh, yeah, we're starting with Law. Law was on the podcast, and I mentioned that you would be on the podcast later. Mm-hmm. And he said, there is this incredible story about John Galliano calling Memsor and telling him he needed some inspiration. And Memsor took him, you guys went riding around in Harlem.
Let me correct this for the record. Okay, so everything in the story is somewhat true. What happened was, I think I was the fashion director at Vibe at the time, and I got a call from a very famous PR agency. We won't say the name because I haven't cleared it with the person who worked there. But he called and was like, "I've got something to ask you. Would you be keen on taking a designer around Harlem?" I've lived in Harlem for a good chunk of the years. I've lived in New York, know it like the back of my hand, inside out. So obviously I was the first choice to call. And I was just like, "Oh, I'd love to. Who and what for?" And I listed all the places I'd maybe take this person to. And they're like, "Oh, they just want to drive around and soak up inspiration." So I was like, "Okay, cool." And I mentioned all these places, and they're like, "Oh, he doesn't necessarily want to go to any of these places, just want to pop in a car and drive around." So I said yes, and it never happened. That's the part of the story.
Uh-huh.
But I was ready, willing, able, available, and found out later on that it was for John Galliano.
Wow.
So that's the story, for the record.
For the record.
And I know Law has told this story. One of those stories where it keeps metastasizing and becomes something else. But I think and why he loves the story so much, and also what it speaks to, is the idea that Harlem, we as a
Yeah.
people, Black expression has long served as a source of inspiration to so many people. And I don't necessarily think that there's anything wrong with that.
Right.
Just give credit where credit is due. And I
Absolutely.
think that, hey, I'd love to see on the runways of Milan collection that was inspired by flappers and Harlem Renaissance and all these things, but let's not whitewash it and kind of erase the roots and roots that are rooted in obviously in sometimes struggle, sometimes fighting to be seen against all odds, sometimes just really polishing your own star. Like there's
Yeah.
people who don't have that much and have been able to show who they are and express themselves with sometimes not access to much. So all of that, if you're going to pull from the inspiration, that should be reflected and acknowledged.
Absolutely. When I think about the fact that you've been doing this and you've been in this industry for 2 decades, I don't want you to walk us all the way back.
I know. Okay,
Don't walk us back to London
be
because I'm
here
going to
or
come
there.
back to that in a minute.
Okay.
No, I'm coming back to that.
Yeah.
But I want you to walk us through your career. Like you started at Vibe and walk us through.
So I started at Vibe, but how that began was I was working at Ralph Lauren, 72nd and Madison, the sports store, not the mansion, which is no longer in existence. They broke it down and built something else. But coming from London to working at Ralph Lauren, you're able to kind of jump straight into the front seat of American fashion. Yes, I was at the store level, but you were working for one of the like premier, at the time it was the 3 of them. It was Ralph Lauren, it was Donna Karan, and Calvin Klein. So being at the store, Ralph Lauren, the sports store, which is distinct from the mansion, which is more stuffy and we were younger, spunkier, fun, you were able to kind of really see how the vision that Ralph had was being distilled. That's different than the across the street. So first kind of signs of, okay, there's difference. But also you walk down the street, Donna Karan was different than Ralph Lauren. So they're very clear pillars. So I worked with this, I think Ralph Lauren at the time was like almost like a finishing school. There's so many people in the fashion industry who went through those doors. So started as sales, worked my way up to management, and there was someone that worked there by the name of Michael Carl. He currently works at Hermes. Hi, Michael. And he left Ralph Lauren to go work for Paul Wilmot. I can mention that PR company. And so I was working for a PR agency, and he would call every so often and be like, I haven't the slightest idea what I'm doing here. You love fashion, you read all the magazines, you know what you're doing, what have you. So if I can do this, you should and you could. So I'll let you know if anything pops up. So he gave me a call like months later and was like, hey, there's a job available for the assistant at, well, I didn't know what the job was actually, but it was to assist Mary Alice Stevenson. And at the time she worked at Harper's Bazaar. So he's like, could you get your resume together? Now, there's something that happens in this brain here of mine where being a global citizen, words and expressions and all of that, I have to suddenly toggle back and forth. But yes, I know, and I'll get my resume together, put the phone down. I was like, oh, what the hell is a resume? Because having grown up in the UK, I knew CV. By the time I figured that out, what it is, get it together, pulled it together, sent it off, the job was gone. Because as you know, like grass doesn't grow under anyone's feet, especially in New York. So that's
Right.
one of the first lessons. So resume ready in hand, obviously a bit bummed, a bit disappointed. I then was primed and ready when he gave me a call, maybe a year or 2 later, that's how long it took, to say, hey, there's another opportunity has popped up and there's a new fashion director of Vibe magazine and they're looking for an assistant. Well, you know, I cartwheeled straight to the resume,
Right.
and then popped it in the fax machine because that's what you did in those days. This is how long we've been around. You can just send an email. So popped it in the fax machine, sent it off, and had an interview. And the day I had the interview was memorable because there was a hurricane that had approached New York, and it was like gale force winds. Everything was like insanely wet. And you know, New York, Fashion Week, the traffic already. But also notable on that day, so we can actually pinpoint this to an actual day, that very day, Alexander McQueen was showing in New York. Funny enough, a show that was inside a building, but it was inspired by strong winds. The models were walking against the wind. So kind
wow.
of eerily prescient. But I remember showing up at the interview literally soaked from sternum to boots, like sopping wet. and sat with the new fashion director. She actually had allowed me to take my boots off and sit there with my socks. But because I had such a passion for fashion in general, but also Vibe magazine in particular, because when I was in London, used to read Vibe magazine, like not read, study it cover to cover, the gutters. I knew who did what and how many times this stylist had worked with them, who all the editors were. So I came, and through the wet outfit, this part of me was dry and shiny, and managed to impress her enough to get the job. But she was like, "Oh, let me then take you down the corridor to meet my new boss." So I managed to put some shoes on and walk down, and the doors open. She knocks on the doors open, and newly installed in the position, there was the previous fashion director, who was Emil Wilbekin. And
Love Emil.
love, 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 love. That man is like a North Star for me, because when I was in London, and when I was in London moving to New York, I had bought a Time Out magazine, Time Out New York. Now, bought it for two reasons. One, I'm moving to New York, so I need to see what's going on in New York, but then also Naomi Campbell's on the cover. I buy any magazine with Naomi on the cover.
Yes.
Obviously for the numbers, and we know what that means. But
Absolutely.
I said, he's my North Star, she's my spirit animal. Obviously, as the only Black super, I think I understood innately more than, I think now we understand it more, but there was just something that spoke to me about, she was holding her own in that group of girls, all fantastic. And I mean, history has written it. She's still
Absolutely.
and outheld.
She's still that girl. Yes.
Outheld a lot of them.
Absolutely.
And I love them all. But
Yeah.
yeah, she's still. So
Yeah.
So bought it. She was on the cover. And speaking to the power of representation, it was a Fashion Week issue. That's why she was on the cover. But they had done a profile on 5 individuals in the fashion industry, one of which was Emil Wilbekin. So, I read that one, but obviously I recognized the name, being called Memsor Kamarake. I have a knack for seeing names that are somewhat out of the ordinary. So but I also studied Vibe from cover to cover. So seeing his name, and it was a breakdown of day in the life. And at the time, he was the market editor at Vibe. And I remember pointing at that, taking it all in, and connecting it to the fantastic images I'd seen in Vibe magazine. I remember pointing to it then and saying, that's the job I want to do. So imagine all of that emotion that I suddenly am now in his office.
Right.
I'd met him once before. I was introduced to him by a friend, Quanis, like years ago, and done a whole, oh my God, happy to meet you, what have you, and told him that, yeah, I'd followed his career, what have you. So imagine now when I walk in there and it was him. I had no idea he was the new editor-in-chief. And it was as good as being anointed by the fairy godfather.
Wow.
So got the job and was at Vibe as fashion assistant for years, working under Angela Arambulo, who was the fashion director at the time. Angela Arambulo, I'll mention, actually doesn't get enough credit for bringing what she knew. She had worked at Harper's Bazaar herself. So she brought a fair amount of structure and essentially, hey, this is the way things are done over there.
Right.
And that's essentially what I learned for. So even though I didn't get the job at Harper's Bazaar, I still got their training.
You still got the training. I love it.
So I worked as fashion assistant to Angela Arambulo for the longest time. Years kind of elude me because, I mean, it's so long ago. But I then ended up getting promoted to market editor. And we now understand this as manifestation and pointing and putting something in your head and visualizing it. But I would say that perhaps still stands as one of the happiest days of my career, because what I loved about market editor, my background was meant to be computer engineering. African parents, you all know. So my brother was supposed to be an accountant, which he did. My sister was supposed to be a lawyer, which she didn't. And then I was supposed to be a computer engineer. So that was the track I was on, education-wise. So when that was derailed, and we might get into that later, I then have always applied formulas to things. And the job of market editor is, hey, this fashion director or this stylist is doing something for the magazine, doing a photo shoot, doing a portrait, what have you. And they could suddenly say, we need white blouses. The market editor's job is to know, white blouse, what do you want? Cotton, twill, organza, long sleeve, short sleeve, Peter Pan collar, or pointed. Do you want a button down the front or down the back? Or maybe off the shoulder? How many do you need? Short sleeves, ruffles, and you have to know what they want and also how to get it.
Right.
And for me, that has always been a bedrock of my styling career. The knowing to, first of all, how to find what it is you need and having the relationships and the connections in order to get it. So sometimes there's a relationship that you've had for the 20 years now that I've been doing this, but sometimes it's literally picking up the phone and you don't know who the person on the other end from a can of paint. And by the time you put the phone down, they love you, inviting you to dinners immediately. Want to be your best friend after one phone call, just so you can get the blouse that you needed for the stylist or editor in question. And did that for the longest time, but then there was a change. Angela left the magazine and then they brought in another fashion director. And he and I did not see eye to eye. So regrettably, after doing, it was actually the photo shoot for like the 10th year anniversary, I think, of Vibe, I ended up just quitting, which was heartbreaking, as you can imagine, because it's like dream job, got to do and see it and be exposed to anything, but everything. But there were two lessons that came with this, where it's like having the strength of conviction to say, you can walk away from this. And you actually said something to me the other day, which I now realize I did. Yes, I had gotten to a dream, but you can dream another dream.
Right.
A bigger dream, a different dream.
Absolutely.
And so I stepped out into the unknown, and I mean, the angels caught me. I was booked for jobs here or there. I had an agency at the time, so they were booking me on all these ad jobs, which is great. You make your money. And then being known for Vibe, I still was doing all this fun stuff as well. So perfect balance. Truncating the story, because we can go on all night, that fashion director ended up leaving. And then they then hired John Moore.
Okay.
And John Moore, it was perhaps, I think, one of the best fashion directors at Vibe. He has such a beautiful hand. And I speak his name because I speak the names of those who have come before me. John Moore, the mix of his styling, his eye is, I think, second really to none. And so, again, I was outside the magazine, but Vibe is my heart, is my DNA. So you keep tabs on it, you keep an eye on it and seeing what's going on. So John Moore gave fantastic images to Vibe. And what I then noticed, obviously, everyone was bringing themselves to the magazine. Angela was of Filipino descent. The other was a white guy from, I forget where he was actually. That's how much I've forgotten about him. But then also John Moore is from, I'm not sure where he's from, but Black American. And but also Emile before, biracial, adopted, and gay. All of these things are infused in the magazine that is held up as a Bible for hip hop and fashion, but it's like tea. All of these flavors are steeped in. So when John Moore left, I happened to be perfect place, perfect time, that they were like, oh, we're looking for a fashion director. And using the lessons that I had learned the hard way earlier, I was ready to return.
I love that.
And the beauty of it was coming back to a magazine that, as you know, these things morph and they change. It was now also not only coming back as fashion director, but there's a new editor-in-chief.
Yeah.
So you now have to tailor to what their vision of the magazine is, but also being able to bring what you have to offer. And all I had to offer was looking in the mirror and seeing who I am. I'm a Black man of African descent. My parents are from Sierra Leone, West Africa. I say it every interview I do. And my father was a diplomat. My mother was a seamstress and lived around the world, Russia, London, Freetown, West Africa. So all of those things are within me, and I made sure that they showed up on the pages of Vibe magazine.
You know what I love so much about like Vibe? I was in Chattanooga, Tennessee, okay, for undergrad, and my best friend, she would get Vibe magazine, and we would literally devour that magazine, and it was crazy because like the reach of it, like you had no idea you were talking to kids in Chattanooga, Tennessee.
Had no idea. But I do think there was an idea of understanding the reach of it because that magazine had reached me.
Right.
I think I was working in London. I was working at The Gap, which we've talked about, but was working at The Gap, and round the corner at the newsagents, you'd go buy your sandwiches, prawn cocktail. They don't do that here. There's lots of different flavors. You know what I mean? So you get your sandwich, you get a bag of crisps and what have you, but suddenly you look on the shelf at the newsagents and it's like the same old magazines. And then I remember one day looking up and seeing, what's this magazine? And it's almost like a punch to the face, but a breath of fresh air. And it was Albert Watson, who shot Tretch from Naughty by Nature. And it was the test issue of Vibe that had somehow made it to the newsstands in London. And that one image literally disrupted the rest of the flow of my life, because that's what made me reach for the magazine. That's what made me reach for just and dive deep into what was represented in those pages. It, for me, was essentially a gateway, a portal, do you know what I mean,
Right.
to where I am now. So it's less of not saying I didn't understand where the reach of it. Maybe I didn't know these places.
Right.
I didn't know what a Chattanooga was. I still don't know where it is on the map. Even no shade. I know where Tennessee is. Yeah. But I think that because I had had that influence, I knew that it had spoken to me. That's what I knew I wanted to do when I became a contributor. I styled for Vibe.
It's
a few times,
amazing.
or editor. And that's what I've always tried to do. Make sure I create an image that, yes, it maybe has to serve advertising needs. It has to serve all these sort of needs, but creating images that speak to that other person that's like, hey, are you sure you're doing what you're doing? Let's just slightly tilt the trajectory of your life and see where you end up. And I can sit here now proud enough to know that I have done that. So
Wow. No, that's beautiful, though. I love the fact that an image can do that. Like, again, like sitting in Memphis with my aunt, remember she would give me, she subscribed to Harper's at the time, and no one else in my family had Harper's and Vogue magazine sitting around, but my aunt. If you knew her, you would know. It would make total sense.
I could.
But I would look through those magazines and literally get lost. Like, I would come in indoors, she's like, Brandice, I got new magazines. Because I just sit there and I would go into a whole different world, because clearly back then there were no like photo shoot budgets.
No photo shoot
Because they were so extravagant.
It's funny because I actually somewhere, and I've kept a lot of these things, and it's really funny we were talking of this, because some people will call it pack rat, some people call it hoarder, but I dream of shelves such as this. But I somewhere do have one of those breakdown budgets for a Vibe photo shoot. And I remember keeping it at the time specifically to point out that, oh, folks aren't going to believe how much we would spend. So I'll see if I can dig it up, and by the time this goes live,
You should send it to me.
because it was insane. But it was also savvy. Like, we would call ring tourism board of Trinidad and Tobago. Like, hey, we'd love to come down to do a shoot. And they're like, oh, we'd love you. And all expenses paid. That's one of the best ones. Yeah.
I love
like,
that.
There was so much. And I think it's a savvy that I learned from those who'd come before me. But I also think that you know how we do.
Yep.
This it's an innate skill. We can take 50 cents and make it look like 50,000.
Absolutely.
So the idea that we had money for those budgets, for those photo shoots is one thing, but I think there's a lot of ingenuity and like the next level thinking that is representative of who we are. So
love
that's what made those photo shoots sing.
Love that. If you look back over your career, like, what are some of the highlights? Some of the moments that you were just like, I can't even believe I'm in this room right now.
I'll kind of go in reverse because there's so many, far too many, and I think I've been blessed to be able to actually say that. But I remember I styled, there's a black country artist by the name of Mickey Guyton. And she was singing at the Super Bowl when they were in LA at the SoFi Stadium, whatever year that is. This is my gay cards are showing.
I don't know.
Neither do I. But all I do remember was LA playing. No shade to the other team, but I just remember we were in Los Angeles, and I mean, you understand all the stereotypes. You understand all of these things that are said as a gay boy coming up, and I remember pinching myself when there I was, making sure her dress was set right and on a stage that was at the 50-yard line in the Super Bowl.
Wow.
And I knew that there would be a million
Wow.
people, guys, that would kill to be in that position.
Right.
Right there. and walked off just before she sang the national anthem. And you look up and you see the stadium. It's like, that was a pinch me moment.
Wow.
But I also think that I've had the pleasure to be in many a room with many fascinating individuals, some sometimes who make the headlines, some who don't. There's many an artist that we've shot that the career hasn't gone anywhere. But I always say that I see people on their ascent. I never met President Barack Obama. I met Senator Barack Obama. And at the time he was running to be the president, obviously. And we did a photo shoot. It was like a novel approach for him to be to appear on the cover of Vibe. And we had an annual issue called the Juice issue. So it's like, okay, he's going to be on the Juice issue. So, I mean, what do you do? I understood that there were certain like rules about dressing someone for politics. You're also not trying to dress him in something which is going to trip him up politically. So let's keep it American designers. Obviously, it's the Tommies, the Ralphs. Didn't know if he would wear anything, but they said bring it anyway. It's also Vibe, so we're like Air Force One, let's take a play on that. So we reached out to Nike and they tricked out and painted and what have you. So we all took the train, the Acela to DC, and we set up in his office in Congress. I actually have a picture of this sign. And you're walking around and there's a picture of him and Nelson Mandela, their ceremonial stools. It was all this stuff. You're walking around and he was on the floor voting at the time. So was late for the shoot, walks in and was like, oh, sorry to keep you waiting. And at the time, Danielle Smith was the editor-in-chief. So she kind of gave a little like look at the clock and he's like, well, would you rather me in here doing a shoot or actually getting the work done? There's very few people who are what you see is what you get.
Yep.
Mariah Carey's one. Brandy is also one. Like, imagine. And Barack is high on that list as well. That what the public image is exactly that. Wow. So cracking up jokes, and he kind of thumbed through the things, but he's like, oh, I really can't wear any of this here. And not because he didn't like it, but it's just this idea where it's like, hey, we're busy and you understand the tightrope. I think that also speaks to that tightrope that we have to walk.
Right.
So he's like, oh, I can't be, do you know what I mean? And not that I brought a do-rag, what have you, but just the idea of like, oh, him chilling with a pair of Air Force Ones and alluding to that. So you explore all of these concepts, and it ended up me, okay, lint rolling the suit and just making sure everything looks great. But I think this is where sometimes, and stylists, we're known for adding on and piling on. And in this case, rather than an addition, in this case, subtraction made for the better issue, because I was like, can we take your jacket off? Between the photographer and I came up with the idea, and it was kind of a, okay, moment's thought, but he did. And he starts rolling up his sleeves, and you can imagine I've been there with nothing to do all day. So I was like, okay, no, let me lean in.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget, as I'm doing it, he's like, very African funny enough. He's like, did you go to school for this? And I was like, sir, you've taken everything away from me for the day. Let me at least do this.
Right.
So he's then standing there like model-esque, like I'm doing this professional role. But the image of him, he was posing and doing all this stuff, and you should check the images out. It was shot by Terry Richardson, which is now very controversial, but at the time was. But the beauty of those images was like you suddenly got to see a looser, less stiff Obama, and the image of him looking at his watch, and became the cover under the caption, "It's Obama time."
Oh, I love that.
So they did two covers, one a close-up with him in the suit and the tie, what have you, but then they did that other one. And that alone was a pinch me moment.
Right.
Because but it spoke to the idea of, okay, getting your ego out of the room. You're here to do a job. Right. Everyone wants to add the extra piece or say that I did this and all that. But I think sometimes you're served by the simplicity. And I think that's something that runs through my work, where I could have the styling moment, and you know of which I speak, but sometimes the styling moment is, can we pare it down, because I like the subject to come to the forefront. Right. You've seen images where someone is wearing something that doesn't become them, and it's wearing them. Yeah,
absolutely.
I could read your mind. Yeah. I saw you do a flip through. So that's the moment it spoke to, but that's extended even further, that when the Smithsonian Museum in African American history in DC opened. I can never say the full name of the museum. But you know the one, the black one, Blacksonian. I just saw that today. I didn't come up with it. So you go there and you walk through and it's heavy, heavy, heavy. But suddenly there was one of the galleries at the top that focused on Obama. And I'd gone there with Victor Glamour, friends of mine, and happened to break away and saw this whole exhibit. And they kind of had the walls plastered with all paraphernalia and images and what have you. And I suddenly see one of my Vibe covers.
Oh, wow.
On the wall there.
Oh, that's
It's
amazing.
the first time I've actually said this out loud. And I never posted it.
Wow.
So
That's
that, I think, was a
amazing.
pinch me moment. Yeah,
That was definitely a pinch me moment.
for sure.
As you look through your work in the industry as a fashion director, as a stylist, I know you styled Wendy Williams
Yes.
for a very long time. What has been some of just like the challenging, like one of the most challenging things about being in this industry in your position?
Sips tea. I think for me, one of the most challenging parts about being in this industry is that invisible line of when are they a client and when are they a friend. That's one of the first ones, because I've always had a warmth about me, and obviously the job that we do. I think hairstylists understand this, manicurists. You sit there and clients pour their hearts out to you. So you get a front row seat to their life.
Right.
And you're part of it, and you're doing your job to help enhance and be a supporting character in their role, gladly.
Yep.
In their movie, so to speak.
That's really interesting. Okay. I love this, where this is going.
Yeah, and I'll go till we say stop.
Okay.
So the most beautiful part about this is that you, manicurist, hairstylist, makeup artist, anyone part of the glam squad, entourage, stylist especially, you're seeing these people in their skivvies. You're seeing them in their underwear. You're helping them into the Spanx. You're zipping them up. But you also get a front row seat to their life.
Right.
Good, bad, and ugly.
Right.
And I think that when it's good, it's very, very good. And when it's bad, it was horrid.
Yeah.
That's a very, very famous line. And I think that line of knowing when they're friend and when they're not is something that I always just keep it professional.
Right.
You're a client.
Right.
As close as this can get, you're still a client. And that has served me well.
Right.
But it doesn't always work in your favor.
Right.
And as you have heard throughout these stories on this podcast, there's times when the tide turns and you find yourself on the other side of the revolving door, sometimes through no fault of your own, or sometimes because you pushed the damn thing and wanted to walk through, and you're like, deuces, I'm out. Pull the cord, what have you. So that is the part, most importantly. You're helping create history, but you're also front row seat to history. And history isn't necessarily always tidy or always clean or clear. Also, the beautiful part of having that front row seat is you get to see the little suggestion you made or the minute change you made have lasting effects.
Yeah.
We took someone like Wendy, who you mentioned, from having a very sort of brash in-your-face image and kind of toned it down and made it more palatable for TV. And then once we got to a comfort zone, we're able to kind of push the needle forward. Yeah. And the idea of what folks wear for daytime TV, which has gone way out of control, if you ask me. But I think, listen, like if people show up on TV with an evening gown, what have you, but hey, do you? I'm not mad at anyone's self-expression. But I think the idea of breaking past those old school rules, forging new ground, the girls at The Real were a fantastic example of this. I love what Harrison's doing over with Tamron Hall, for example. But I think the idea of what is acceptable now wasn't acceptable how many years ago? And I think that idea of you take the good and the bad, the rough and the smooth.
Yep.
To go from someone who was a pariah socially and taking her to now she has a line at HSN where people want to buy clothes inspired by her is a feat that I can pat myself on the back. But it's not just me. There's so many of us are doing it.
Right.
There's so many people whose names I can mention who are behind the scenes taking the blows as well as the successes.
I love that. Okay, so as you look out on the industry now, and you've been doing this for a while, and you know the ins and outs, and you know the people.
Yes.
Do you feel like we are in a more hopeful place? We as in people of
People of
color.
color.
Yeah.
As I look at the industry now, I really do believe that we are in a much better and hopeful place. Are there for sure challenges? Yes. But I remember when I used to go to the shows in Europe and the lights would go down. Like everyone assemble, you know, you go to a fashion show, everyone assembles, lights would go down. And then when the lights come up, it'll be like raisins on white bread where the black people were. One there, what happened and there. Obviously myself included. You know you're representing something bigger than yourself, what have you. For me, just the sheer numbers of people of color in the industry that are out there doing and killing it lets me know.
Yeah.
But that's on the editor side. I think also through the work of people like you, I do remember, you keep calling yourself a fashion outsider, but
am.
she's not.
I am.
You're in there, sweets.
I'm outside.
You're in there.
I'm telling you.
Give these messages in there and you're in. But through the work of folks like you, you're in those rooms saying names and bringing lists and giving recommendations. So definitely want to make sure, give you your flowers for sure, because I've seen how hard you work to do it. But I also think that, I mean, DEI is being battered and worn out. There's an understanding, I think, now that we have that we are our own best friends.
Yes.
We have to support one another.
Yep.
We don't always have to agree. We are
Right.
not a monolith by any means.
Right.
But I just think the idea that we can plot a path forward if we work together.
Absolutely.
I am by no means the only stylist out there, and nothing industry-wise is going to make me hate another Black stylist.
Right.
They might get the job over me, but I think it's fantastic. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think, and so should designers. They might get a collaboration. Let's cheer them on, because a win for them is a win for you as
Absolutely.
well. And I think that sort of collective thinking, maybe it does go back to now my African upbringing, where let's all fill the well, let's all go to the well and fill what we need to, because at some point you're going to need to drink. So put a
Exactly.
bit of the work in, and there's a reward later on.
I love that. I love that. I think we're in a good place too. But I'm also like, I remember a friend used to call me Pollyanna.
Because you're like,
It's like, where do you live? Behind a white picket fence? But I do see that we're in a hopeful place. I mean, we are not where we need to be, but
by no
by
means.
far. But I am seeing more designers of color like doing their thing more than ever before.
More than ever, yeah.
As you think about where you're headed, what do you feel like is next, or what do you want to be next for Memsor?
What I want to be next? Well, I mean, this is part of my reemergence tour. I think the one part, and I say reemergence, but it was the idea, as I mentioned at the beginning of the conversation, where I had done so much for other people. I'd poured so much into the industry, had assistants that have gone on to do bigger and better, done designer shows for free, styling them because they didn't have stylists. Romeo Hunt, I'm talking to you. Okay, Laquan Smith, you too.
Okay.
I love them to bits, but
Right.
you do your bit to
Right.
help out, right? So having poured so much into everyone else, it was an idea of taking time to do for me.
Yeah.
We live in such a world, and obviously it's what I do, where there's such emphasis on the outside and external.
Yeah.
Dressing up, as I mentioned before. The idea of going internal and just really tidying up and making the insides look as pretty. And we talk more about it now openly, but there is something about mental health where you're constantly going, you're constantly keeping up a fast pace, late nights, early mornings, what have you. It does take a toll on you. And I'm not a big drinker, not a big partier, not all of those things, but I think it's the idea that there's a time to take a step back, take stock about where you want to go, and reapproach the industry in ways that make sense for you. And part of what I'm now doing is I'm a global citizen. I'm understanding that more and more, that I want to travel more. I see myself having a travel show. Just to be out with the people. As I have a friend who says, you never meet a stranger. I mean,
Right.
so, literally sit next to someone on a plane and we're now friends for how many years? Or we get off the plane and they're inviting me to dinner in their house. And you're like,
I can totally see that.
Yeah, it's all the time.
Totally see
literally,
that.
I was flying to Grenada and this lady was like, oh, are you hungry? She's like, you need to eat, and put the whole food. I was like, I'm not hungry. And then it was patties and all that. I took one or two. And then she's like giving me her home address by the end of the trip. And they're like, do you know her? And I was like, no. That's kind
Right.
of stuff that happens. But I think For me, it's the idea of film, for sure. Costume designing a movie. There's a few ideas I have, but I'm there, obviously, available for hire. But I have a book that I need to write. I've been writing a few chapters. But most importantly is the idea of telling my own story.
Yeah.
I think for so long, if you don't speak and don't use your voice, nature abhors a vacuum. In there go all these different things. You obviously heard this even with the law story, which he meant well. You know what I mean? So for me, it's now the idea of just being present, telling my own story. And that will help the vibration of what is to come next.
I love that.
I'm open, ready.
I love that. I know that you're a big proponent of giving people their flowers. Who are a few people you want to give their flowers to that have come before you?
I have always given those who've come before me flowers. I see Freddie Lieber and hug him sometimes in ways that he's like, okay, please unhand me, young man. You know how proper he is. But it's the idea of giving folks love while they're still here to let them know, hey, I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for what you did. Obviously, I mentioned Emile. I actually did, whilst I was fashion director of Vibe, an article, funny title, called Respect the Architects.
I love that.
And I featured June Ambrose, Misa Hilton, Tamika Foster, Kite Brewster, because I assisted Kite Brewster for a while. And then we ended up shooting Chrissy Lampkin at the time. She styled Jim Jones. But it was the idea of speaking to those folks who had come before me who I had wanted to shoot Groovy Lou, but he wasn't available. You know how elusive he is. But the idea of speaking to those who had come before me and set a blueprint of sorts that I could follow or not and explore, go down a path and come back. But I also think that, as I said, if I see myself as a link, it's passing that knowledge and that knowledge of who they are to those who have come behind me.
And you have done an amazing job of that. I've seen so many people that you've mentored, and you are one of those people for so many. So, Memsor, thank you so much for being with us and for sharing your story.
Thank you for having me.
Let me just tell you, this is rare. And we're excited to have had you. Thank you.
It won't be the last. You'll see more of me.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Love you to bits.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Fashion and Color Podcast. I want to thank our production partner, PVA Entertainment, the Harlem's Fashion Row team. Thank you so much for your support of Harlem's Fashion Row and for your support of Designers of Color. Please be sure to leave us a 5-star rating on your favorite podcast platform, and be sure to share this with a friend. Welcome to the HFR movement.